Between the increasing heat and the ongoing drought, there are concerns over our power grid's reliability. Nick Loris, the Vice President of Public Policy for C3 Solutions, joins us now. Nick, thank you for joining us. Here we go. We're getting into summer. How much does the heat stress our supply power?
A great deal, both from a demand side and a supply side. Obviously, people are going to be needing more air conditioning, so they're cranking up their AC and demanding and using more power. But at the same time, on the supply side, this extreme weather can really crib off some of our supplies, whether it's drought or heat waves or wildfires. That can affect the amount of hydropower that we have available, particularly for the western states. But also for cooling towers for our power plants like nuclear. If there's less reservoirs available for cooling our power plants, that constricts supply as well. So both from a supply and demand standpoint, this extreme weather impacts the grid reliability and particularly elevates the risk in places like the Midwest and the western states this summer.
Nick, great points. What kind of points would you give the public, such as myself, during a heat wave? The thermostat reading, I hear leave it at 78. What are the numbers? What should we be doing, Nick?
Yeah, about 78's been right. That's what a lot of experts have said to maintain reliability and to ensure that we have fewer rolling blackouts and brownouts. If you can stand that, particularly if you are healthier and it's easier for you to maintain a little bit of a higher level of air conditioning rather than keeping it at those frigid temperatures, that really helps. And I think trying to run your appliances when there's not peak demand, so not at 5:30 p.m. when people are really ramping up their AC, but if you can run them at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, those little things, especially if they're done by an entire community, can really help reduce some of the strain on the grid.
Is there a difference, Nick, between a brownout and a blackout?
Yeah, a brownout, ultimately, they can roll, and ideally you're not with power for a very long time, or, you still might have a little bit of power. But, some of these sustained blackouts, for instance, like we saw in Texas during that winter storm where people were without power for days, that's where it really not only creates problems systemically for the grid if these blackouts remain and power is offline for a very long time, but also threatens and endangers livelihoods, which is what we saw in places like Texas. So the more that these brownouts and potentially blackouts can roll and switch from community to community so that people can have access to power for bits of a time to heat and cool their homes or to eat whatever they might need, that's ultimately what we want to see from a power grid if it gets to a point where we unfortunately may or have some type of blackout or brownout.
Nick, what kind of weather would you say is it the biggest threat to power? Is it the heat, the severe weather, drought?
Yeah, drought certainly is a huge stress, as I mentioned, especially if it impacts hydropower and impacts the cooling towers from some of those thermal power plants. Obviously, wildfires have stressed a lot of western states, particularly by knocking down some power lines, too. If you have extreme wind and the power lines, which most of the countries are above ground, that can knock off a lot, too. And obviously, some places for extreme cold, if you're not prepared for it and if the grid's not hardened and able to accept that risk where power plants are freezing, essentially, and pipelines are freezing, that's ultimately what caused such big problems in a place like Texas, too. So some places know that they're going to be hot and can prepare for some of this weather, but at the same time, as things get hotter and as these extreme weather events occur more frequently, it only continues to put more stress on the grid and more cost, which ultimately goes to the ratepayers.
Nick, real quick, what can we do to improve our grid system? Is there any improvements that could be done?
Yeah, I think we really need to open it up to competition in areas where there's more competitive processes that allows for innovation, that allows for more competition, more choice, but also ultimately more reliability. And it allows for people to install things like batteries in their homes to have some more backup generation. I think the more we can transition to a model that allows for more accurate price signals, that allows people to figure out when they can use and conserve power versus when they might need it, that's ultimately going to be best for the consumer, but it's also going to be the best for our grid reliability moving forward.
Nick Loris, some great information. You've educated me, Vice President of Public Policy for C3 Solutions. Thank you so much, and stay cool.